Many tabletop campaigns contain moments of horror, a disturbing discovery, a frightening encounter, an unsettling piece of information. These moments can be memorable, but they often fade quickly. The reason is structural. A frightening scene does not automatically create a frightening campaign. Sustained dread requires something different. It requires pressure that continues from one session to the next. And that kind of pressure does not come from a single moment. It comes from patterns that slowly reshape how players interpret the world around them. A single horror scene relies on surprise. Something unexpected happens. Players react, and the situation resolves. Campaign horror behaves differently. Instead of isolated surprises, it builds a pattern of uncertainty. Clues accumulate. Questions remain unanswered. Consequences linger beyond the moment they appear. Over time, the players begin to feel that the situation itself is not resolving. It's expanding. The world does not return to normal after the frightening moment. Instead, the frightening moment becomes a part of a larger structure that continues to unfold. And once players begin to suspect that the situation is growing rather than resolving, tension begins to carry forward between sessions. I once ran a mystery where the players discovered a strange symbol during the first session. At that time, it seemed like a small detail. But the symbol appeared again later in the campaign, and then again in a completely different context. By the time the players encountered it for the third time, the symbol had begun to feel less like a clue and more like a warning that the situation was much larger than they had originally believed. You see, horror scenes rely on surprise. Something frightening happens, the players react, and the moment passes. Campaign horror works differently. Instead of isolated surprises, it creates patterns of uncertainty. Clues accumulate. Questions remain unresolved. And the situation slowly expands instead of resolving. Sustained dread often relies on repetition. Symbols reappear. Locations become familiar. Characters behave in subtly unusual ways. Each individual detail may seem small, but repetition changes how players interpret the world. A pattern begins to form, and once players begin recognizing patterns, tension increases naturally. What once seemed like coincidence begins to feel deliberate. Players start wondering whether the events around them are connected. And once that suspicion begins to take hold, even ordinary details can start to feel significant. Repetition turns isolated moments into structure. In one campaign, the players repeatedly encountered the same phrase, but in different contexts. It first appeared in an old journal. Later, carved into a wall. Eventually, an NPC related the phrase seemingly out of nowhere. By the time the players noticed the pattern, the phrase had become deeply unsettling. Not because of what it said, but because it kept appearing in places where it should not have been. One of the simplest ways to sustain dread across sessions is repetition. Reoccurring symbols, reoccurring phrases, reoccurring locations. Each individual detail may seem small, but repetition creates pattern recognition. And once players begin recognizing patterns, uncertainty grows much stronger. Another important element of sustained horror is incomplete answers. Players should discover information, but that information should not resolve the entire situation. Instead, it should reveal new layers of uncertainty. Each answer expands the mystery rather than tightening it. This changes how players approach investigation. Instead of searching for the single explanation that solves the problem, they begin to realize that each discovery may introduce new questions. And that realization shifts the emotional structure of the campaign. Discovery no longer feels like progress towards a resolution. It begins to feel like progress towards something deeper and more unsettling. The mystery is not being solved. It's being uncovered layer by layer. In one investigation, the players eventually learned what had happened in a particular location. They even discovered who had been responsible. But that answer revealed something more troubling. The person responsible had been acting under the influence of something else, something the players still did not understand. You see, solving the first mystery did not end the investigation. It simply revealed that the situation was larger than they had imagined. Many campaigns treat clues as solutions. Players discover information and the mystery resolves. Sustained horror works differently. Clues do not close the mystery. They expand it. Each discovery reveals deeper uncertainty. When repetition and unresolved information begin working together, something very interesting happens. The campaign begins to develop pressure. Players start anticipating patterns. They begin questioning what they know. And that pressure does not disappear when the session ends. It follows them between sessions. Players speculate about what they might have misunderstood. They reconsider clues they previously dismissed. They wonder whether the next discovery will confirm their suspicions or complicate things further. In this way, the campaign begins to occupy space outside of the table itself. The mystery continues evolving in the player's mind even when the game is not actively being played. And that is one of the strongest indicators that sustained dread is working, because the uncertainty has become persistent. Horror scenes are easy to create. Sustained dread requires structure. It requires patterns that continue across time, repetition, unresolved information, and pressure that carries forward between sessions. Because horror that disappears at the end of a scene is only atmosphere. Horror that persists across sessions becomes something much, much deeper.